Starship Troopers Terran Command. It had a demo drop a few days ago, though I only got around to playing it recently, and let me start by saying demos are awesome, and any and all companies that still bother making demos should be given the bare minimum of head pats just for that, because God, I miss demos. Back in the day, you could get demos for anything. You could purchase gaming magazines with demo discs for dozens of games, so that you could make a properly informed purchasing decision before parting with your money. Yet these days, the only way to get a demo is to buy the game, play it for under 2 hours on Steam, and then try to refund it. Not really, adequate replacement now, is it? But, anywho, enough about that. Let's talk about Starship Troopers Terran Command by Slytherin and the Aristocrats. Starship Troopers is, of course, one of those awesome universes that just does not get anywhere near enough love and needs so many more games, particularly the RTS and more tactical-oriented games, and this is definitely far more in the tactics directions of things. There is a small element of base building, and it does appear as if a fairly key gameplay component is going to be holding terrain whilst also venturing out into the hinterlands and closing bug tunnels and various hives, meaning that you will need to have a base. You do have HMG turrets that you will defend your base with as you use the mobile infantry to sally forth and clean up the map. A potentially very interesting form of gameplay, especially if maybe you could even have a overground and underground layer with bug hives that need to be cleared out manually. Though again, the focus is on tactical combat. The base buildings are placed in predetermined locations, and then you determine the order in which you want to get the buildings, as they are limited by a resource that is doled out piecemeal over the course of the mission, as you gain access to various resources, as you complete objectives, and you find resupply points across the map. These various buildings then give you access to various types of units, like engineers that can build heavy machine gun turrets, which also use the same resource as the buildings, or snipers, or radio operators, and so on. A nice mix of units will probably be key to keeping the game interesting in the long term, as you will also eventually, I'm presuming, introduce different forms of arachnids as well. Right now, I have seen the basic arachnid warrior, the spitter bug, which is half and half an invention of the game and the third movie, and also some chariot bugs, though they are of course non-combatants, and hopper bugs. Ideally, these various bugs might require their own particular unit, not necessarily to counter them outright, but various units would be stronger against various targets. The snipers take care of the spitters so you don't get ranged down, the engineers take care of large hordes of warriors by suppressing and dealing AoE damage, and the riflemen take care of hoppers. Maybe you could have a unit of rocket troopers to take care of tankers, or the giant marauder mech suits we've seen in the trailer, for example. Lots of units would definitely be cool here, as again we are dealing with a fairly tactical RTS. Now, one of the key points of the tactics too is that your troops cannot fire through one another. So if you have a rifle squad, for example, they can fire at arachnid warriors to their front, but if there is a rifle squad behind that squad, that second unit cannot fire because their friends are in the line of fire. Now that's rather interesting, particularly with the rather narrow and craggy maps. You gotta set up in such a way as to bring to bear the maximum amount of firepower, whilst also trying to combine your unit's abilities. The engineer's flamethrower, of course, needs a field of fire that is open of any friendly interference, just like the rifles, though the snipers can, to a degree at least seemingly, shoot through your own troops. I would guess that something like the mech suits could probably shoot over their heads as well, as there is also an element of elevation. If you put that second rifle squad on a hill behind the first, then they can now shoot over the heads of the intervening squads and engage the enemy alongside them. This is a pretty cool way of bringing the map terrain into focus as well, and making the game more than just an attack move simulator. That was a big problem with the first Starship Troopers RTS, whose name escapes me. Rise of the Federation? Terran Ascendancy, I think that was it. That game... It told you, like, oh, be careful of bug hives, you should split up your troops and, walk around in smaller groups so as not to trigger the emergence of the arachnids. But the thing was, when you had smaller groups, they could get overwhelmed by the arachnids. When you just had all of them in a giant firing blob, not so much, really. Anywho, I do like the focus on tactics, though the AI can be a bit on the derpy side here. It's rather finicky to try and determine exactly what is and isn't a clear field of view, as sometimes your units will be very picky. You have a unit slightly off to the side of another unit, and they go, no, there's like one friendly in the field of fire, none of us can shoot. And other times they seem quite blasé about it, able to have like a bit of a staggered firing line where most, if indeed not close to all, of the riflemen can shoot, even though the targets aren't straight in front of them. There are also times where the units respond very slowly. This is due to the rather sluggish animations. The engineers, for example, if they get attacked in close quarters, despite having flamethrowers, they're not going to be able to throw themselves around and start firing immediately. Instead, the model is going to have a very slow spinning animation as it turns towards the enemy. By which time, in all due likelihood, the poor engineer has already been snipped in half by a warrior bug. And speaking of snipped in half, they also need to do a lot more work on the sound effects. The arachnids make almost no noise whatsoever. Even when they die and they charge, they should be screaming and stampeding and roaring and roaring in a terrifying fashion. The Morita assault rifle sounds okay. It's alright. It could use a little bit more oomph, and the heavy machine gun turrets definitely need more oomph. Those are twin-linked Dishka machine guns. They should be dung 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 dung. And yet, it falls prey to that. I don't know what it is with video games, but almost all guns in the video games end up having that plinky plonky sound effect. I have no idea why. But it needs a little bit more work there. The voice acting, too, is... The sergeant, for example, his voice and his portrait do not fit together in the slightest. A bit more, appropriate casting might be good there, but, it's not awful, surely. Though, on the topic of voice acting, one of the things that is rather difficult about portraying Starship Troopers properly is that it is a movie often very misunderstood, particularly if you haven't read the books or really gone into a little bit of depth about the first movie. This game leans primarily on the first movie, thank God, with some elements of the later movies, a little bit of the anime, and some elements of the books kind of spiced in as well, like the giant mech suits, for example. But it falls into the trap of making the mobile infantry retarded and callous as well. There is a couple of voice lines that stands out in particular, for example, where you are ordered to leave the civvies and not try to rescue civilians as you are making your way through a colony being attacked by the bugs. The mobile infantry is not the kind of fighting force that just go, oh, they're just civilians, screw those. No. This is one of those misimpressions that people get from the movie, where they look at that colony that got absolutely butchered by the insects, failing to realize that the colony was established against the express wishes and advice of the Federation, and the separatists there were not considered to be Terran Federation civilians by, again, the Federation. The Terran Federation would very much so be the kind of military organization that would put a lot of effort into trying and secure these civilians, particularly as this is on a valuable mining outpost. Later on as well, civilian miners, it is implied, is forced at practical gunpoint to go down to the planet and just run unarmed towards mine openings, being fed directly into the waiting jaws of the arachnids, and it's even revealed a little bit later on that Terran Command ordered them to do this knowing that the arachnids were not defeated, purely to stir up the hive. Civilians are not second-class citizens in the Federation. They aren't just used as cannon fodder like miners. Go over there and die so us, the proper citizens, can fight. No. The civilians are protected by the mobile infantry. It is because the mobile infantry puts their lives on the lines to protect the civilian populace that they are eventually awarded with the franchise. They take direct responsibility for the safety of their civilization. Even in the first movie, for example, when Rico's squad was sent down to that outpost that had very clearly been ambushed, they were hung in front of the arachnids as bait, yes, but it was because they were the mobile infantry. And even then, that was only done as an extreme measure of, well, outright desperation. The mobile infantry needed to know what they were fighting. They couldn't simply just make another wild guess like with Clendathu. Whilst they had the theory that a brain bug existed, they needed confirmation. They could not afford to launch another large-scale operation on half-heard rumors and hearsay. They had to know for sure, and therefore they put a unit at risk to get that confirmation. Again, a unit of volunteer soldiers, not civilians. And your female officer person is just that, callousness and incompetence. Like, yes, I did throw those civilians' lives away, ha 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 ha, mustachio twirling villain levels of callousness. I am not a fan of that, because again, that is not the idea of Starship Troopers at all, but we shan't judge the game's story too much based on a demo, of course. So let's move on to something else. A couple of things that I noticed that I would like to see maybe slightly tweaked. The difficulty settings are already really good. On the basic difficulty, the game is fairly easy. You need a little bit of tactics here and there to be sure, and bearing in mind these are the first few levels, so it could get a hell of a lot harder later on. But with your units dealing full damage, they can by and large gun down the arachnid warriors without a whole lot of threat. If you, however, bump the difficulty up just by 1, so they deal 25% less damage, the game immediately gets a hell of a lot more interesting and more hectic, as, just like in the movies, the Morita assault rifle needs quite a few bullets to put one of those little buggers down, and the warriors become a much larger threat. Oh yeah, you can kill them by the dozens, but for each and every warrior that dies, the next one gets just 1 meter closer. And when the warriors get into melee, they are going to rip and tear your poor little MI apart awfully quickly. So the difficulty modes are already good, but I would love to see one that added in even more bugs. More bugs, because the arachnids feel a little bit anemic in terms of numbers. By and large, more often than not, in fact, the humans outnumber the bugs, which, it's not quite how it's supposed to be right there. I'd also like to see perhaps the addition of a bugpedia to tell you exactly what you are fighting. The first time you run into an enemy, like the warriors, you get a little bit of a link, which leads you to a 3D model of the unit with a little bit of information, like this is the arachnid warrior, it's the basic biatch common soldier bug, they are fast, tough, aggressive, and they can take a lot of damage, best countered by, engineers perhaps, or grenades and so on. Or this is the hopper bug, you want your rifleman to deal with this. That would be really cool, and would also help a lot of people who don't know a whole lot about the Starship Troopers universe get a bit more into it. You should definitely also be dropping some lore hints about the Federation as well, so as to try and avoid the usual tropey-ass mistakes about Starship Troopers. Additionally, and this is a much larger gameplay change that I would like to see be made an option, I honestly would love to see the addition of ammunition. because you have radio call-in troopers that can call in essentially dropships which allow you to resupply your numbers. I would really like to see ammo. Now, have it be fairly generous ammo, because the Morita assault rifle holds an absolutely ludicrous amount of bullets for, reasons. But I feel like this kind of cool upwards hill battle against the bugs you can get in the third mission in particular, man, it would be so cool if you had to maintain some kind of almost supply line. Like you had to return to your base on occasion to fully replenish yourself. Maybe you can only replenish like 25% of ammunition in the field. Make it feel a bit more like an extended campaign, really, where the destruction of each and every bug hive is a major tactical victory. Maybe as an optional difficulty mode, because I would absolutely love that, and he would add in yet another level of a little bit of stress. The third mission actually does this rather well, with continuous hordes of enemies assaulting your base, whilst you need to be out trying to destroy the bug hives as well. The problem is you kind of end up in a position where initially it's really tough, but as you get enough units up and going, you can kind of ignore it because there's so many heavy machine guns and so many dudes in your base that you don't really need to worry, and frankly, due to the constrained nature of the terrain, even if you wanted to, you can't really bring all that many more units up into the mountains to fight the bugs. That'd be really, really, really cool, but yeah, again, a bit more of a personal taste kind of thing. All in all, I am really liking what I've seen so far. The tactical gameplay is interesting, reasonably challenging, a little finicky, but flows fairly well. The animations have improved a little bit since the trailer. I'd still like to see a bit more in the way of animations, as the mobile infantry still kind of just stand there, firing their weapons like little statues. Maybe a little bit more would be good. A little bit more voice acting, definitely. Like, have them scream a little bit as they get cut apart, like, bugs, bugs, fire, stuff like that. And the arachnids absolutely need to make a lot more noise than they are currently making, definitely. And as for the story, from the little I've seen of it right now, they seem to be heading a little bit in the mobile infantry is comically inept and evil route, which, again, as somebody who's a huge fan of the movie and the book, that is not the mobile infantry. That is not the Terran Federation. That is the very surface and I wouldn't even call it surface analysis. It is the very mistaken analysis of the first movie, which a lot of people get the timeline wrong on that. Let me whinge a little bit about the resource as well. So you get a resource that is called War Support. This is apparently the Terran Command support of you, so they'll give you stuff in return for resources, which is also like, okay, really? My command structure is like, yeah, we'll only give you some extra points if you gather resources for us first. Call it requisition or something. Like, war support is... I know, I get it, it's just another resource, but the mobile infantry doesn't work like that. You are not supposed to have greedy officers who withhold the tools you need to win because they need you to, get the thing before you get it. You need that to pick up that little supply depot over there first. You need to pick up that bundle of weapons first, and then we'll look kindly on your request for another heavy machine gun turret. But, again, it is far too early to begin judging any kind of story or plot lines from 3 demo missions, so consider that my own little whingings on the matter. All in all, I am looking forward to this. I think it was delayed by quite a lot, I believe. Let me check here real quick. Yes, it will be out in approximately 5 months, and considering this is a game that was supposed to be released last year, yes, they have certainly added in some delays, but hey, as long as that results in a good Starship Troopers game, I can definitely deal with that. If you're interested in giving it a go right now, I highly suggest you do go and download the demo to play through the first 3 missions and get a little bit of a feel for the game yourself. Until next time, I've been Arch, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.